With Saudi Arabia's recent investment into the sport of boxing, your favorite fighters and promoters are getting paid more money than they have ever been paid in the history of this sport. But is all of that money, and is playing the game on Saudi Arabia's terms, destroying your favorite sport? Fighters making more money is undeniably a good thing. And all that extra money not only brings wealth and prosperity, but it also brings huge pay-per-view fights. We are getting matchups that we never would have gotten in the former disparate world of boxing. If you're not a boxing loyalist, you may not be familiar with their model. If you watch UFC, you understand MMA is the sport, but UFC is the leader. And because UFC is the leader, they have some of the biggest names and they can put together whatever fights they want to. Boxing operates differently. There are independent promoters, independent promotions. There's not one heavyweight champion, there's multiple. And then occasionally you might get some sort of unification. With all of this extra Saudi Arabia money, they're able to buy giant fights. They're able to pay unreasonable amounts of money to force two people to fight each other that wouldn't previously have done that. And that's objectively a good thing if this is your favorite sport. The problem becomes when somebody injects hundreds of millions of dollars into an event, they now own that event. They have control over the production and they can decide what happens. Who is the WBC to say, oh no, we're not gonna have a 7-hour event with live music halfway through it. We need to run a normal show. And that's what's happening. For example, I am filming this on Saturday, December 21st. Tonight is Tyson Fury versus Usyk 2. The first fight was a success as far as pay-per-view numbers were concerned, so they're running it back. And now what we have is a fight card that starts at 10:30 a.m. my time. The main event does not start until 5:30 p.m. my time, which means we have 7 hours of prelims. And that's not because there's 50 fights, that's because there's live concerts. There's other odd events. So the pacing of this event is going to be horrendous. And what that's going to do is downstream affect the viewer experience, future pay-per-view buys, and the overall eyes on the sport. And that is my concern with what's going on here. The money is outstanding. Putting together massive fights that never would have happened before is outstanding. But hosting fight cards at odd times, and yes, I understand time zones exist, and the UK, for example, is directly benefiting from this. But the US is one of the biggest pay-per-view markets on the planet. The UK is probably number 2. So when you're hosting events that are not at favorable times for the biggest pay-per-view market in the world, you get fewer eyes. So while the pay-per-view money will not matter because Saudi Arabia bought the entire card, the eyes do matter. Without the extra couple million eyes that you're gonna get from different markets, you're not able to build young up-and-comers. You're not able to showcase future world champions. Because if people aren't watching, and if they're waiting till the event is over just to see a highlight on Twitter, watch some quick recap on TikTok, you're not getting the eyes on the future sport. And without building those prospects, without building the next generation of fighters, your next generation of boxing isn't going to be here. Saudi Arabia's money is great. What they're trying to do to the sport is a good thing. The problem is the execution. Nobody is going to repeatedly show up for 10-hour boxing events. Nobody. People aren't going to be buying boxing events at 10 a.m. on Saturdays. We need some sort of hybrid. We need some accommodation for the different time zones. We need faster events. When you blow out a budget and you do a huge main event, we need some sort of pacing and cadence so that when new eyes show up, they have an enjoyable experience and they're not just sitting around waiting. But it's not just boxing, this happened with the PFL as well. Their mainstay pay-per-view, the tentpole event of the year, Francis Ngannou's return to the cage, was a disaster. And not because the fight sucked, because you can't really control that, but it was a disaster because of the pacing, random live concerts, ridiculously long times in between fights. And it's a turnoff to the viewers. So next time it's ready to buy a pay-per-view, you may not. The numbers will flush out the way that they do. We'll see what happens with the pay-per-view buys for Usyk Fury 2. The first one was a success, but it also suffered from some pacing issues, wasn't the greatest viewer experience, and that may reflect in pay-per-view buys for the sequel. The money is in the right place. The heart is in the right place. The execution needs work. as of right now, if things don't change, we are gonna end up in a world where boxing is irrelevant in the next generation. Netflix, on the other hand, while it was an unmitigated disaster to have a buffering stream throughout the entire Paul Tyson fight, and while that fight was a bit of a joke on the surface, it brought 65 million eyes, 65 million people that saw young up-and-coming fighters, that saw the event. And you can convert those people to lifelong boxing fans.